Okay, folks, I will call the General Committee meeting to order. Welcome everyone to our virtual General Committee meeting of Barrie City Council. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are practicing physical distancing. Members of Council, Executive Management, the City Clerk are all participating via video conference. Senior leadership team who have reports on tonight's agenda are available to answer questions. And we do have a full agenda for General Committee tonight. As always, though, we'll go through it first as a consent agenda. For the consent items, I'll read out the title associated with the recommended staff report or the motion item for discussion. Members of General Committee can ask the item be held so it's discussed further. If an item is not held, the motion that's printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent. There will be no further discussion of the item tonight, and it'll go forward to City Council for consideration at our next meeting, which is next Monday. So, consent agenda. We start with the reports of the reference advisory or special committees. The report of the Finance and Corporate Services Committee dated November 17th, 2020 is to be received. Finance and Corporate Services has recommended the following motions. First, referred by General Committee dated March 9th, 2020. This is the response to motions 19G 218 and 19G 255 regarding noise bylaw enforcement. That is approved by General. Next, we have an item regarding the City of Barrie's infrastructure standards with regards to sidewalk joints. Came out of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. No holds on that. That is approved by General. Staff reports. We have a number of staff reports tonight. The first is an amendment to the City of Barrie's street addressing policy. Oh, come on. Nobody wants to talk about the addressing? Oh, well. Okay, that's approved on consent. The next item is with regards to the municipal names registry, some additional names for future street names. There's 3 that are being proposed. No holds. That is approved.
As long as we're leaving Evergreen Terrace in there, I'm good.
I remember that motion.
I read that carefully in case we were trying to take it out. I'm good.
Next item is with regards to the City of Barrie's 2021 Cultural Grants Program and the response to the COVID pandemic. Okay, no holds on that staff report. No, that is approved on consent. The next staff report is the capital project status report. No holds on that. I'll make mention of that during the announcements or perhaps ask Mr. Miller to speak to that during inquiries, but that's been approved on consent for now. The next item is a confidential labor relations / employee negotiations matter, 2021 QP negotiations. Okay, no holds on that. It is approved as printed. The next item is delegation of owner representative for water operations, quality management system, and the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. This is a motion required by statute. No holds on that item. It is approved on consent. We have the Enforcement Services Staffing and Growth Review 2020 to 2041.
I will hold it until after the presentation.
Deputy Mayor Ward, thank you. Next, we have an item regarding the expropriation of city-owned land by the Ministry of Transportation in wards 2, 4, and 5. This is associated with the ministry's expansion of their property holdings. Any holds on this item? Nope. Okay, that item is approved. The next staff report is an investigation into parking restrictions on Saunders Road. No hold there, and that's in Ward 8, and that is to amend some no parking areas or add them on Saunders. The next item is an investigation regarding additional parking restrictions along J.C. Massey Way in Ward 3. No holds there. That item is approved. And finally, the last staff report on the agenda today is with regards to automated speed cameras in schools and community safety zones. No holds. The item is approved as printed by General Committee. And as I'm sure there will be some interest around that one, I will just note at this point that that is to continue moving forward with deploying with planning and arranging for automated speed enforcement or photo radar to mobile automated speed enforcement cameras, which would be rotated among community safety zones and school zones around the city. So that has been given general committee approval tonight with a report back on the next steps. Okay, items for discussion. We have 4 on tonight's agenda. The first is with regards to Bill 229, Protect, Support, and Recover from COVID-19 Act with regards to Schedule 6 regarding conservation authorities.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Harvey. The next item is with regards to the North Shore Trail Vegetation Management Plan. Okay, if there are no holds on that, I'd like to declare a potential pecuniary interest, Madam Clerk. My parents live adjacent to the North Shore Trail, so I will not be participating in the vote or discussion on the matter.
Your conflict has been noted, Mayor Lehman. Thank
you very much. The next item is an investigation into the installation of a crosswalk on Elmbrook Drive, adjacent to Trillium Woods Elementary School in Ward 7. It's put on by Councillor Harvey. No holds. That item is approved. Finally, we have an item regarding additional sound barriers along Highway 400. It's put on by Deputy Mayor Ward, Councillors Aowen and Kungle.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Jim Harris. Okay. So we have 2 items that were held, or sorry, 3 items on tonight's agenda that were held. The first one is the subject of a presentation, and that is by Tammy Banting, our Manager of Enforcement Services, who's been looking at our level of service when it comes to bylaw enforcement and all related municipal law enforcement matters. Ms. Banting, over to you for your presentation to General Committee. I think you might still be muted, Ms. Banting.
Can everyone see me now? Great. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Your Worship and members of committee. What we were asked to do in 2019, Council brought forward 2 motions, actually. The first being to look at staffing requirements within enforcement services as it relates to providing some proactive enforcement in all bylaw matters, and then prepare for the anticipated growth as we move forward in the secondary plans and overall delivery hours of service. The second portion spoke more specifically to the Georgian College neighborhood area with respect to providing or perhaps providing a property standards officer to look at that. We had prepared the initial report in a summary back in March of 2020. Unfortunately, with the pandemic that hit us all at that time, that report has been delayed. So we're now bringing it forward with some additional changes that we have thought through for the last few months. So the elements that we looked at when we were proposing some staffing growth within enforcement services is keeping in mind the council direction. We looked at an actual report that was conducted in October of 2018 by Watson and Associates that looked at the long-term growth review and considerations for the city. We looked at one of their proposed growth plans, being the Barrie growth plan, and it anticipates that we would be looking at 253,000 people by 2041 as an anticipated growth. We also know that the expectations of residents and the needs of those residents, including complaints coming forward, are increasing based on our current trends. Unfortunately, with the pandemic that hit everyone at the same time, it really did drive home the need for enforcement staff and looking at how we can build for the future coming forward. Within our review, and because of the COVID response, we do know that in addition to our regular activities that are already in place during the peak first wave, the 5-month period during the first wave, we added an additional 11,000 complaints that were solely related to the COVID response. When we look at some of the other resources that we considered, we are looking at aligning some further resources so that we have staff in place to be able to respond to those. The other things that we looked at more specifically were the Noise Bylaw and Line Fence Act. With respect to those two pieces, we actually looked at the noise bylaw more specifically. We do know that this is a general bylaw. It is anticipated that enforcement services, who does bylaw enforcement, should be able to deal with it. And we do to a certain extent. We deal with the quantitative noise matters, such as air conditioners, pool pumps, those things that require noise level readings. We also looked at the section that is currently enforced by the police department, being the qualitative, so your quality of life around your residence. A lot of that relates to noisy parties is a big concern, and then obviously noisy mufflers, which I'll speak to in a moment. But with respect to the parties, we considered the officer safety as being our foremost piece that we wanted to consider. When we spoke with Barrie Police Service, they indicated that for those large party type gatherings, for officer safety measures, they do send on average 2 officers to each one of those calls. Enforcement Services doesn't have that option available to them. The other consideration that was brought forward, more related to those matters, were other items or violations, if you will, that it can be found at those types of calls. So we're talking about underage intoxication, illegal use of drugs, assaults, those types of things that can come forward, none of which can be addressed by enforcement services staff when we go there. The other element was related to noisy mufflers, which we know is a very important topic and has come up several times recently. Staff within enforcement services don't have the legal authority to actually address moving violations, which in this particular case it would be. So that would have to be a police response. And it can be confusing to people when they consider the noise bylaw as a bylaw and that enforcement services should do it. The last thing that we looked at a little bit more specifically was removing the activities related to enforcement services under the Line Fence Act. Currently, we act as arbitrators for any of those matters that come forward, where we will mediate the disputes between the 2 neighboring properties or multiple neighboring properties. Well, we only dedicate about 90 to 100 hours a year in actual applications that are received. There's obviously more staff time that is involved with some of those things. We feel that it's relevant to pull our activities under the Line Fence Act, which we do have the authority to do, with the exception of Section 20 under the Act that still requires a municipality to address those if they come up. Otherwise, fencing regulations, the general fencing regulations, are still considered and regulated within the zoning bylaw for the city. So it does address current street line setbacks and overall heights. As we move forward onto the next slide, it looks like in this particular picture, you saw in the report, all of you would have reviewed the overall increase that we've seen in calls for service, but definitely not an increase in staffing. We have not increased our permanent staff complement since 2003, but we do know our calls for service have gone up over 25,000 during that time frame. While we do conduct services to the community 7 days a week, generally between 7:30 and 11 p.m. Most of the year, and then winter months, obviously, with our winter control regulations coming in place for parking, we do run 24/7 from December to March. That only addresses general enforcement matters, such as parking, parks regulations, animal control, those items of that nature. When you're looking at key items that were brought forward as part of Council's motions in 2019, We don't provide 7-day-a-week coverage right now for yard maintenance or property standards matters, business licensing, those other key elements that do happen, obviously 7 days a week, but we don't have staff currently that are available to do that. On the next segment, it really just formalizes all of which I've been talking about so far. We haven't increased our staffing. This gives you a very quick snapshot of the call volume difference, the administrative matters that our office governs, and then our staffing complement that hasn't increased since 2003. While we know that council can't necessarily be involved in specific enforcement matters, we do look to you, to committee and council, to give us guidance as to how you want matters addressed when a bylaw is brought forward, as an example. Do you want it to be proactive enforcement? Do you want it to be reactive enforcement, meaning a complaint-only basis? And depending on those, that's really why we have not necessarily had to bring forward staffing requests until this point. When we were looking at moving enforcement services forward, we needed to consider the overall increases that we've had, and sustaining our current response times will not be able to be maintained with our current resource levels. So moving on, this is just a very quick glimpse of our breakdown of calls for service. I know that's a question that's come up before, sort of where are the efforts put and where are the majority of the complaints or calls for service brought into our office. So as you can see, it gives you a general breakdown. It's not very specific, but it gives you a general breakdown. It looks at the general complaints, so citywide. That could be things like animal control services, that will be debris complaints, or any of those general enforcement matters. The one thing I will bring up is the property standards and yard maintenance. We know that that was a focus of the motions and that it has been a concern of committee and council. When you look at the overall numbers for property standards and yard maintenance, there is a breakdown within that slide, and albeit yard maintenance is a higher volume of calls through that total category, when you look at it specifically throughout the municipality, it is not the highest volume. That's not to say that it's not a very important category. It's not something that obviously we don't dedicate staff to. We do. I think the difference with that particular one is that affects your neighborhoods directly. They can see it out their windows. They can see it as an ongoing matter. When you look at parking violations, which obviously is a very high number, that's not something that the general public would necessarily notice. If somebody doesn't pay for parking in our downtown, as an example, that generally goes unnoticed by the average member of the public. So it's really trying to look at switching our focus a little bit to enhance some of the other priorities that came forward. When you're looking at this slide, it sums up really what I've been expressing. We had a 29% increase in population since 2003 and a 54% increase in our calls for service. So the response the community is expecting, at least to date, has been something that needs the calls to be addressed. And I think generally speaking, we're looking to committee and council to see what level of response that you're looking for. If you're looking for a continuation of the reactive enforcement measures where it's mainly done on a complaint basis, or if you're looking for something that's a little more proactive, which we heard in the motion that came forward in 2019. The other highlight that I wanted to put in here when we were looking at it is really just to recap some of the COVID response that we had, especially during the first wave, when it was at that critical point to bring not only our community, but province-wide into a better position. So while staff accepted the new responsibility of taking on one of the lead positions for enforcement, it definitely did drive home the need for more resources. While we responded to these complaints 7 days a week, we created a live answer option for the public that was available 7 days a week. Unlike most facilities throughout the city, we were very good at responding to those, but again, it drove home the need for staff because of delays on other responses. We weren't able to get to our regular matters, if you call it that, as timely as we currently do. The next slide that you'll see is a quick snapshot for your reference on current response times. This definitely does not reflect everything that we do within enforcement services, but it does bring home some of the most familiar points and lets you know that our average response time is currently for all of those disciplines. So general enforcement, nuisance type matters, snow removal, obviously we're coming into that time of year. We can usually, depending on other investigations that are going on at the time, but we can usually respond to those within 2 hours. And that would be 7-day-a-week coverage. As you go through the list, you'll notice I've separated property standards. The term property standards is used widely, but there's actually two different sets of standards. There's the exterior, which is yard maintenance, and then the interior, which are true property standards matters. And generally speaking, for the interior property standards matters, we are averaging about a 3-day contact with the property owner to get in and arrange for an inspection. Yard maintenance, we are looking at an average of 3 days to do our initial inspection. Then we start the process to ensure that the property is brought into compliance. So there can be a delay. What we're looking at doing with some of our requests as we move forward is enhancing quite a few of those categories. So the next slide really starts to talk to the options you saw in the actual staff report. One being no change to our current resource levels. Well, that's an option for committee. That's not necessarily something that we are proposing for 2 reasons. One, at this point, we know that we can sustain those current response times that you just saw in the previous slide, but that isn't something that could be kept up over the coming years. We do know that if the trends continue with our calls for service, those response times that we just looked at will continue to be longer and longer. So we do have to make sure that we are considering those, that committee and council eventually are considering those when they look at it. It does allow us to keep the same general activity level with respect to parking matters, as an example. But again, it wouldn't address any increase coming forward. So we found ourselves at that tipping point. And we are at a point where we're looking for guidance further from committee and council as to what you believe the community is looking for with respect to our current responses and future responses to any complaints coming forward. The next one is generally what we are proposing. And this was something that we considered greatly over the last few months, especially due to the constraints that not only our municipality, but every municipality almost nationwide is facing right now due to the pandemic. So what we're looking at right now is almost proposing a phased approach towards proactive enforcement in light of all the constraints that all communities are facing. We are proposing now to do 1 complement, increased complement in 2021, and then 2 in 2022. And also looking at reallocating a current complement that is in legislative services over to enforcement services, so that we can eventually, our thought is by the mid 2022, we would be able to get to that achievable level of 25% more proactive enforcement, meaning we would be able to patrol for yard maintenance violations instead of responding from complaint to complaint. We would be able to anticipate giving you 25% more proactive. While we're looking at this phased increase, we're also considering, we will be considering putting in a full rotational schedule for those staff that are involved in enforcement so that we can provide added service the 7 days a week rather than just the general enforcement matters that are dealt with currently. The next option looks to immediate increase of service levels. So it still provides you with 25% proactive enforcement which is our general recommendation for the community, but it allows for immediate implementation. So that would be no phased approach for full-time enforcement staff would be hired in 2021, and that would just provide an immediate response and be able to build that rotational schedule right away and be able to provide that enhanced measure to a 7-day-a-week approach to all the enforcement matters. Next up on the slides are the resource costing. This is looking at the no change, obviously fairly simple. Maintain current response levels. So that is still a requirement for staffing, but this is the phased approach. There's 2 costing levels there that's anticipated. And then the immediate increase to service levels, again in 2021. So that would be all the staff hired at once and ensure that we are gaining that 25% right away. The next one, just to ensure council that we are not asking for anything that is out of the norm. We have done surveys to other municipalities, and this gives you some of the details that were provided to us. There's a little bit more information in the staff report, but this does give you a glimpse of the details they provided. Well, not every municipality, frankly, almost no municipality has the exact same regulations, and nor do they address things in the exact same manner. These municipalities are close to Barrie. They have similar regulations in place, and they give you an idea of similar size and location. As you can see in the breakdown, Barrie's calls for service are high. Now ours does include parking, as does some of the other ones, not all of them. And you saw the breakdown on the slide 6 that gives you those overall details. We do know, however, that our current responses and current resourcing can't continue to maintain those levels. And as you can see, we are fairly low with respect to overall resources within enforcement services. The last section that I wanted to bring up was just a couple other things that are considered, but the actual details are deferred at this point because not all decisions have been made. One is related to the parking strategy. So the evening downtown parking payment, that obviously is a deferred decision, which may or may not impact resource levels. The downloading of any services from other agencies or levels of government can't be anticipated necessarily, so that was not a general consideration that we put through on the report. And then obviously any future targeted or dedicated enforcement, as we saw in 2020, there was a switch in our summer months, which was warranted due to the issues we were having in our waterfront areas, more specific, the 2 specific parks. But providing that additional dedicated or targeted enforcement takes away from current resources and responding to other matters. So when those types of decisions come forward, all of that overall picture needs to be considered, that it will cause a delay in other responses and other enforcement matters. So those are really the decisions that need to be looked at and considered when you are reviewing the report. And we are working forward, trying to bring enforcement into the future. And that would conclude everything we wanted to bring forward. It's just a quick review of the staff report that you already have in front of you. And if there's any questions, by all means, myself or Ms. Cook could assist you.
Okay. Pardon me. Thank you very much, Ms. Banting, and thank you again for all the work that was done on this review in a very, very thorough report, which is in our package and public on tonight's agenda. Councillor Aylwin, questions? So Councillor Aylwin first, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And thank you for that presentation. It's greatly appreciated. And the number that really does stick out to me, and we had talked about this before, is the 70,000 enforcement matters and how that compares to other similar municipalities. It's quite a bit higher. And I like the positive spin that you had put on that number at the time when we talked before, that, you know, that's a sign of a really engaged community. Great spin. I think there's another perspective to that perhaps people aren't as engaged in their neighborhood as they could be. You know, maybe we could reach out to our neighbors more. I've had neighbors in the past that I'd be reluctant to reach out to on an issue, on a bylaw issue. But so I'm wondering, when we're talking about being proactive, it seems we're still just talking about proactive enforcement. Do you see any opportunities in terms of education or outreach to the community so that we can reduce the number of violations, but then also potentially help people resolve violations without getting to the level of enforcement?
Through you, Your Worship, if I may, there is always an opportunity to do that. We do currently work with our communications branch to provide information throughout the community. Not in 2020, but normally we would go to Georgian College for their student housing open house that they have, and we run through different particulars. We do have pamphlets and online information that deals with, being good neighbors and those types of things, but there's always an opportunity to enhance those. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, because I think, if we can prevent these things upstream, then we're saving time and money down the road. So I appreciate that. Thanks again. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Councillor Irwin. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Ms. Banting, thank you again for the presentation and all your hard work. Definitely such a fundamental, important portion of our city. My question is similar to Councillor Aylwin. So when we go to look at slide 14 and we're talking about 70,000 enforcement matters, did I miss a slide? What portion of that exactly is parking? How many of that is parking?
It's actually on slide 6. There was a general breakdown, but parking is a large majority of it. We would issue, I believe on the slide, it shows about 50,000, just over 50,000 parking matters in a year. So really your balance is similar to those other municipalities, but some of them don't do parking. But from a workload perspective, that is a big consideration for us to look at and include in the report.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. I guess, again, just kind of going along with Councillor Aylwin, I know 2020 has been a difficult year, obviously, but looking forward for more proactive approaches, because that's a pretty high number. So, but I know you're doing the best you can with what you have. Absolutely. We had lots of conversations over the last couple of years, and I do know how hard your staff work. And sometimes there have been situations where, I've requested someone to look into something and they're just there isn't anyone available. So that's really, really hard being a city councilor and trying to, address something in a timely manner, which is important to your resident. And it's just really in line. So I think that's important for all of the public to see. And I'm really looking forward to having more conversation on how we can improve this. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, Ms. Banting, for the presentation. I think this presentation is an important reminder to members of council who remember the planning committee meeting we just had. The city's growing, and I think a comment to say about getting more dense developments, especially of the design of condos, it means we get more money in from taxpayer dollars, and those condos, while they do use the city of Barrie for enforcements, like they do use it for parking, they tend to use it as a lesser rate than urban sprawl, as I think Councillor Alwyn said, inefficient growth. So there is to be said that the more dense development we get, the more efficient that enforcement is allocated. So hopefully Ms. Banting has less of a hard time later doing enforcement and more resources. So I do have a question for you, Ms. Banting, but I had to get that comment out because it's somehow tied into her planning. Any word back from Georgian College on their contribution? I know Councillor Reitman, I think we co-moved that one. And I know you said the whole COVID situation, but essentially to refresh members of council, Councillor Reitman, I just moved a motion that they cover half of a bylaw officer. I think everybody around the horseshoe at the time acknowledged the fact that the Georgian College perimeter is unique in terms of the volume and the nature, and starting to spill out into the east side of Ward 2, a little bit of the north side, Lionsgate of Ward 3. So, basically, they do amazing things for our community, and we definitely believe in them and invest in them. So I was wondering what the word back was on cost sharing, that enforcement officer.
Through your worship to Councillor Morales, we did start the initial discussions. Unfortunately, when we were going through some of this information with them, there was considerations on what can be done for Georgian on top of them possibly cost sharing or covering the costs. I believe the motion was actually to cover the cost of the entire officer. So there were some of those discussions. Unfortunately, with everything that came forward through the pandemic, those discussions were halted, and we anticipate coming back in 2021 with them to review and consider the rest of that motion. So it is looked at for 2021.
So let me clarify my question. Okay, COVID happened, I get that, but what was their response to, hey, City Council wants you guys to pay your share of enforcement? And their response was? I'm just refining the scope of my question.
I can say it was not a definite no, but they were requesting more information and considerations on what could be done on the Georgian property, possible enforcement, those types of general discussions. No decisions were made, obviously, but general discussions were undertaken.
Okay, perfect. So no, that I appreciate that. Probably let's send somebody nicer than me to do the negotiating. If it's a soft no, I think we can still get to a yes. But I just have sympathy not only for the neighborhood, but Councillor Rima. I think at the end of Cook Street, since Georgian College put a no smoking ban on the whole property, do you know? I'm sure you know what the kids did. Yep. They literally just moved right outside the line, and now they are in the lawn portion of all those houses around Cook. So the behavior literally went to the perimeter of the no-go zone, and I feel horrible for those residents. And Councillor Rima just gets torn apart unfairly on some of the social media groups because it's just a problem that policy created. So again, enforcement officer is huge on this, and again, to put a positive spin, we invest in the college substantially. That engineering building was millions of dollars of money from property taxpayer dollars. I remember when Mayor Lehman first brought me into his office when the staff report was coming a couple of years ago. But it was a very important decision. I'm not saying we are responsible. We made a strong investment, and I'm proud of how I voted on that. Just the other week, we gave them $75,000 on helping small businesses and entrepreneurship in a post-COVID recovery. So maybe those things can be very positively brought up, because again, I want to see a continued positive partnership with Georgian College, but Councillor Riema shouldn't be shaking every time he pulls up a Facebook notification on something like Cook Street or anything like that. As you said, we're a growing city. It's been a growing enrollment. Be interesting to see the numbers from 2003, for example, of Georgian College enrollment to now, and enforcement and calls volume of number. And I'm sure you've had the same officer in that kind of general zone. So that is a very important discussion. And I want to hopefully have Georgian College come on board with that coverage. And then my final question was, when you're notifying houses of bylaw infractions or perceived bylaw infractions, what are you doing to bring it into the 21st century? And what I mean by that is, not all the time, I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of the time you have infractions in for bylaw, lawns, cars on lawns, garbage, 3 days, 4 days after collection, those kind of things. It's not always, but some of the time, or significant amount of time, it's people who don't live in the property, which is fair, but that notice gets mailed out, or somebody knocks on the door, gives it to whatever resident's there, or just leaves it in the mailbox if they have a mailbox, if they're in the north end. Well, what usually happens with that piece of paper notice is it gets thrown out or ignored, and then it's the property owner or the firm, 123 in Ontario, whatever, that eventually gets the ticket. And I'm defending everybody. And now the neighbors in the community that said, I followed the process, I contacted bylaw, it's still not getting done. It's been 4 weeks. So the residents are not getting timely results. The owners are in Windsor, Toronto, maybe in Barrie. They are now going from the please rectify it to you're now getting hit with penalties, and they don't find out about it for weeks, months. And then the bylaw department is forced to continue to follow up on this ongoing open investigation, tying up our resources. So what has your department done to make an effort to go beyond just dropping the letter off, whether it be looking to see if that property is owned by a corporation individual who owns other properties, maybe sending it to that file, maybe sending it to emails on file, phone numbers, those kind of initiatives, because we're still doing a late 1990s, early 2000s approach. And again, we're in 2020, and it's not benefiting anyone. It's not even benefiting the landlords, and it's not even benefiting the community that now is stuck a month plus with no action happening. Can you speak to how we're going to move forward to point of contact?
Sure. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Morales. Without getting into a lot of our investigation details, but there are opportunities, and we try and exercise as much as is available currently. We will check to see if there is email addresses throughout the corporation, if there's phone numbers in different departments in the corporations, to try and contact those absentee landlords or even owner occupied. We try and contact those individuals, whether it's through information sharing throughout the corporation. Sometimes we are still legally required to mail out a registered notification to that property owner. Under property standards, as an example, the true property standards matters, we are legally required to send mail or hand deliver to the person, which obviously we're not driving to Woodbridge, to use your example, or Windsor or any of those, but we are legally required to send out registered mail. We do try other opportunities. For complaints that we've had previously in our office, we keep that contact information for any future concerns that come up. So we do have that past information, but if we're legally required to mail it out, 1990s or not, we are required to do so.
I can respect requirements, but the baseline, outdated baseline requirements shouldn't be our standard. Ms. James Reed, I will start with you on this. People sign up for Chimenea permits. People sign up for Access Barrie newsletter, great resources. People sign up for other things. Is there an opportunity, this might be a city clerk question as well, is there an opportunity to maybe have an opt-in button when you're signing up saying, I want to know all things Barrie. I want the newsletter. I want parking, warnings, whatever, that I can opt in and say, if I need to be reached for any reason, here's my contact information. I already know that when a house, has too much water usage, you literally get a phone call from a guy or a lady saying, hey, like your water usage has double, tripled. So we're already doing it somewhat successfully in the water department. Bylaw needs to catch up on this. Is there somewhere that you can kind of use the information you've gathered while still following, privacy laws, that we can kind of get to that point? Because water department's already doing that. So I would want bylaw to catch up.
So the question is around legal notices like a bylaw notification, Ms. James Reed.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. We do, from a corporate communications perspective, have that opportunity right now, Councillor Morales, for people to opt into information, whether it be from a rep perspective or economic development or cultural events. I am going to pass the question to our city clerk, though, with respect to collection of people's personal information, because I think this is a slightly different matter that we're talking about.
Ms. Cook.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales, we do have under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act rules that we have to follow with the collection of information. As Ms. Banting previously noted, we do use all venues that are available to us within the corporation to get email addresses, to get phone numbers. We do start keeping them on file. Legal notices are a little bit different in nature. As in legislation, we are required in some cases to provide, as Ms. Banting noted, registered mail, notice served on a property owner. We do use our best efforts, and we're always looking for ways to improve and the way we conduct our business.
So follow up on that, Ms. Cook, what would looking to improve look like? The thing with this is that we don't get this presentation often. We don't get the pleasure of hearing Ms. Banting and yourself go with an in-depth staff report. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm saying if we don't get this, every 6 months, I'm going to take the advantage to not just accept we make best efforts. I want a tangible plan, and while still respecting the fact that legally we're mandated to put the piece of paper on the door. I get that. Like if bylaws can't not do that, they wouldn't be doing their job. But in supplementary, in addition to, not in replacement of, what would that look like? And once again, I want to point to another department that already goes that step further. The water department actually makes phone calls, actually leaves voicemails. So I get water is a little bit more significant. If there's a giant leak, it could affect the soil, neighbors, it could affect city infrastructure. But if one of our departments is doing it and the other department right now doesn't have the resources, the knowledge, or the practice of going beyond, I put the piece of paper on the door. And I'm not just speaking about generalities of efficiency. When it comes to bylaw infractions, if a house is at the point where it's getting called on, it reminds me of the classic argument that at the time Councillor Prowse said, the kind of houses that have that are problematic with chimeneas are not the kind of houses that are going to then follow the law because they got a warning, right? It kind of goes back to the people breaking the law aren't the ones that are going to fear the fine. So how do we best get the information to the appropriate resources, in the houses I'm talking about would be the owners of the houses, not the occupants of the houses, something a little bit more tangible, because we're already doing it in other departments.
Ms. Banting.
I'm sorry, I thought that was directed at Ms. Cook, but we can definitely look at something like that. I don't have an issue bringing that forward. There are privacy issues that we'll obviously have to review and see what's available to us, whether I can use another department's information that is collected for a specific reason, or whether we try and reach out in a different matter. Unfortunately, I can't give you an exact outcome at this point without reviewing all of those.
And finally, would you need council direction for that, or at least at the exploratory stage, you can do that on your own?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, you would need council direction. We would need council direction to explore that, because you are providing direction to staff. Just to follow up on Ms. Banting's comments about privacy, the privacy laws, we would have to confirm with the property owner that we are allowed to use their information for specific purposes. So the water department collects the information from the property owners to be used for the specific purpose of contacting them for water billing. So we would have to do the same method or get permission from a property owner through the water billing. Like if they give their information to water billing, we would have to try somehow get their permission for us to have their information, or for that information sharing.
Okay, perfect. And I asked these questions, and again, I'm sorry if members of council are kind of wondering, let's move on. That's a big number ask, like over $500,000 to get to where we should have got to. And again, Ms. Banting, you and your department have done wonders over for a decade and a half with resources you should have had to begin with. But if we're going to give that money, let's make sure we're spending it efficiently, and let's make sure problematic areas such as Ward 1, Ward 8, all neighborhoods in the city, but that they are done the most effectively. Because I think if we're somehow able to get the issue to the property owners as efficiently as quickly as possible, we're going to see the number of compliance with enforcement go up significantly, and we're going to see cleaner neighborhoods at better value. So Ms. Cook, I guess obviously we don't have to do it on the fly now, but I'll connect with you offline on how to get wording for that council motion or direction for staff, and yeah, let's just spend those resources more efficiently. Thank you, Mayor Lehman.
Thanks, Councilor Morales. Sorry, I've lost track. Councilor Riepma, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Morales, for letting everybody know the kind of abuse that the councilor for Ward 1 takes, especially in the college area. I guess I have a question for Ms. Banting, and I just wanted you to confirm that your numbers that you've provided do not include things like enforcing our BLR regulations, parking on the lawn, or illegal second suites. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Riepma, yes, it is correct. The allowances for a BLR and the front yard parking, those other matters you addressed, are covered currently under the zoning regulations, which is done through development services. My department would, however, license an allowable boarding, lodging, rooming house. So once they've gotten the permission to actually construct the boarding, lodging, rooming house or the second suite, the enforcement services would license the BLR. The second suites are registered through development services.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, just on those kinds of things, I think Councilor Morales did raise some of the questions that are common in the college area in Ward 1. I must say that people still think that Ward 1 is still the best place to live in the city. We are doing some things right. But it does seem to me that one of the things we need to do is to encourage compliance as opposed to doing more enforcement. If we could encourage compliance, then our neighborhoods would be better than they ever were. So I'm curious, you gave a number of 1,500 property standard matters that you dealt with. Do you know offhand sort of what proportion of that or what number of that happens in the college area?
Through your worship to Councillor Riepma, I do not have an exact breakdown. I will acknowledge that Ward 1 and Ward 2 actually, I would say, take probably a half, just under a half of those. Now, some of those, with respect to Ward 1 especially, can be repeat properties that we are going to, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yes.
With respect to your comment on encouraging compliance, we do try and do that, as I said. Normally, we do it through open houses. We have various information that can be provided not only to tenants, but to the property owners as well on being good neighbors. Not to speak for Ms. Banfield, who I believe is still on the call or on the meeting, but I do know that they are doing a similar process related to the second suites, how to be good neighbors and how to be encourage those property owners to ensure their tenants are doing the same. It obviously will not be something that can be reaching everyone every day, but those attempts are in place to do some. But I would say that between Ward 1 and 2, they probably work towards half the numbers, not quite half.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me. I might say at this point that we have a very good relationship with Georgian College. We have a town and gown committee that in the last couple of years has really been effective, I think. And Georgian College, I think, is starting to understand that their responsibility to their students goes beyond their property line. And in fact, I have been contacted by Georgian College a number of times about student housing that is unsatisfactory, and the students are paying the price for that in terms of their lifestyle, in terms of safety, in terms of a whole lot of other things. So that brings me to a thought, and I'm wondering about your, and I don't need a definite answer from you tonight because I'm springing it on you, but there has been talk in other municipalities, and other municipalities do have bylaws that require the licensing of absentee landlords. And the beauty of those licensing systems is that they every year get to look into the eyeballs of every absentee landlord in the city and get to have a discussion with them. Now, curiously, 95% of all landlords are, just great operators and do just fine. It's those 5% that are the rotten apples in the barrel and cause all the problems. And it's those that other municipalities are very happy with in terms of licensing because they do see considerable improvements in their neighborhoods. So I'm just wondering, any thoughts on that from you? And I realize that question may be a bit unfair. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Through your worship to Councillor Reedma, those items I can't necessarily give you my opinion. The thought has been there, and I know that the matter has been brought forward to council previous, and to date, it was not considered. I can tell you that those areas that we do currently license or register through development services, including those ones, the business licenses for the BLRs, we do inspect those properties annually. We require the landlords to do that. Those are for the boarding, lodging, rooming houses. In a lot of cases, the absentee landlords are running I'll call it a standard functional home, for lack of a better term, albeit they may have tenants in there. That isn't necessarily something that could be or should be licensed. Just because someone has a rental property, depending on how they're operating it. I mean, those discussions can continue on, but I do know that it has been reviewed in the past through this council. So if it comes forward again, we'll consider that as we go.
Just one last observation is in Ward 1, especially in the college area, we have lots and lots and lots of sort of unlicensed or illegal BLRs operating, and they change from year to year. Can you give the residents of Ward 1 any hope that we can somehow get a handle on those?
Through your worship, I will say yes. Our intention is to, with the enhancements, is to now hopefully have the staff that can do more of the door-to-door blitzes. We have done them in past years, but again, it takes us away from responding to other enforcement matters when we do those blitzes. But that's our intent, to look at not only the yard maintenance, but be able to do more proactive licensing matters, to do more proactive sign enforcement matters. We do know that because of resourcing, those things get very delayed or don't happen when we don't have the staff to walk door to door and try and hit certain areas where we believe those infractions are taking place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, members of General Committee, I would like us to move to the staff report and the items on tonight's agenda, but I don't want to cut off those who haven't had a chance to ask a question. If there's something that you want to ask now that would be pertinent to the staff report coming next. Are there any other questions of Ms. Banting on the presentation? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Ms. Banting. And of course, we'll move right into dealing with that matter, as it is the first item that was held on the General Committee agenda, I believe. Deputy Mayor Ward, you held the item.
I will put the item on the floor. I also wanted to make a comment. I figured it wasn't appropriate during that. So.
Yeah, as did I. So you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the report. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I mean, we've got a lot of great staff, and Ms. Banting is one of the best at answering when I send her an email. She always gets back immediately with a thorough answer, which I really appreciate. And I appreciate the part of the report I really appreciate is the part about having it's a balance. You know, we can do proactive enforcement, but it comes with a blowback. I mean, we can look at about a year ago when a bunch of downtown businesses got notices about not clearing their sidewalk as to what happens when we go overboard on proactive enforcement. It comes back to us. We get the complaints about it. So I know there's got to be a fine balance in there. I think that is addressed in the report. My only question, I have just one question if I could to Ms. Banting, and that's I know it's kind of spelled out in the report, I think paragraph 56, but I wanted some assurance that, you know, our city's growing, our downtown's not growing, not yet anyways, hopefully it will in the future. I wanted some assurance that we're not going to be hiring this one person next year and perhaps two people in 2022, that those people aren't going to be downtown handing out parking tickets. I mean, that's not what we want them for. And I'm just getting some assurance from Ms. Banting that's not what they're being hired for.
Ms. Banting.
Mayor Lehman, I'm going to have to jump in for Ms. Banting because her computer just crashed.
Oh, I had that problem tonight too. Okay.
So she's got my old laptop. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Cook.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. The intent with the staffing would be to be spread out for different various calls and like for property standards, for signs. It would just be to more for general enforcement as opposed to specifically for parking. Or if if members of council direct us to do certain types of enforcement, such as example COVID-19, we would redirect the resources that way, but they wouldn't be specifically to address parking infractions.
Yeah, thank you. I know the report does say if we decide to extend paid parking into the evenings, we may need more staff, but at this point, we certainly don't need more.
No.
Yeah. So thank you.
Motions on the floor is printed. Comments, members of General Committee. Councillor Thompson.
Through you, Mayor Lehman. Just a quick question to Ms. Cook in light of Ms. Banting's computer. Do you find that the time spent on the parking, and I know this might be tough for you, Ms. Cook, with the new technology that we've approved in our parking strategy, do you think it would allow officers to spend less time with the plate recognition and all that? Do you think that's going to be something that's going to be easier?
Great question. Ms. Cook.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, that would be something that we would have to investigate as the apps are introduced, because right off the bat, it wouldn't be like citywide that everybody would be using the parking app. It would probably be, we'd have the machines still available for the time being. So I think it would be a phased in approach, so that it would be something that we'd be looking into as the parking strategy and has some of the elements of the parking strategy are implemented. And I see Ms. Banting is back online, so I'm not sure if she has something she wishes to add to that?
Ms. Banting, the question, I don't know if you could hear it all, but it was specifically with the new technologies being used in parking enforcement, such as the ALRs, the license plate readers. Will that change the demand or amount of effort that's required to on parking specifically?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I apologize. I'm not sure what happened there, but to answer the question, I think future state, there is a possibility. Obviously, we're going into some pilot projects with respect to the license plate recognition, including some of the parking apps for the pay parking downtown and so on. We don't know until we go through the entire process to see what's going to work, what isn't going to work, and what is also available to us on a future state. In theory, I would say yes, those staff members can be reallocated if that technology does work in that favor. In the staff report, we did talk, not specific to the parking, but in the 2023 and beyond, the first 10-year phase, that's one of the considerations that would have to be looked at on the potential staffing coming forward. Any changes in technology, processes, provincial legislation, all of those things would have to be considered moving forward.
Thank you. More of a comment. I really appreciate as a counselor you taking the time and using, as Rebecca, Miss Reed actually used with the transit and meeting in small groups. And to echo Deputy Mayor Ward's comments, both you and Ms. Cook, you probably staff maybe the hardest job in Barrie, especially in light of COVID and stuff. And I know both of you have gone over and above with, popsicles and donuts, away to my heart. And but I just wanted to thank you and stuff. Thanks for the report and the time you guys have put into this.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. With the report on the floor, I'd just like to move a quick just amendment to the to that. Mayor Lehman, do I need a seconder for this or no?
No,
Okay.
we're at general, so you're good.
Perfect. So my amendment would read as follows: that bylaw services, and just correction if I'm missing just a word in there, explore ways to have contact information for all properties that, for residential properties, including but not limited to phone numbers, emails, and alternative addresses, in order to allow bylaw services to reach property owners that have properties with bylaw infractions in a quick and timely manner, and report back by the April 12th, 2021 General Committee meeting. And then there's also a second section to my amendment, and I'm going to be sending this to the clerk, that would read that a letter be sent to Georgian College Board of Directors about cost sharing an additional bylaw enforcement officer to enforce standards in the Georgian College perimeter at neighborhood perimeter beginning August 2021, and report back to City Council via a memo, or report back to General Committee via a memo once a response is received. And I'll put it on the floor as articulated.
Okay, there's an amendment on the floor. Members of General Committee. Councillor Morales, did you wish to speak to it at all? Pretty self-explanatory given the earlier discussion.
Correct.
Okay, any comments on the amendment, members of General Committee? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question on it. Those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. Anybody opposed? None, that carries. Thanks, Councillor Morales. Did you wish to speak further to the main motion as amended?
Just Councillor said, like Councillor Thompson reiterated the goodwill. Ms. Banting gets back to you on emails that she shouldn't even get back to you that quickly on. There's emails that I sent her. I'm like, she'll get to it later today. I know she's busy. Like I literally will call into the office and she's busy and she'll get back to me much quicker than possible or on weekends. And again, Ms. Banting, my comments earlier weren't comments of criticism. They were comments of accountability in the sense of, value for taxpayer dollars. And again, I want to emphasize the fact that you should have had these resources in the mid 2000s when Barrie started becoming one of the fastest communities in Barrie alongside Milton, etc. The fact that you've done what you've done with the resources you had and your department as well, not just you, is kudos to you. But we need to, obviously, this revamp is long overdue. And the more money we give you that, you should have had long ago, resources. Also, we need to be as efficient with it as possible, allocate it properly, and look to our great partners, such as Georgian College in the neighborhood, and also make sure that they pay their fair share for not only the negatives that are occurring in the communities we serve, but in order to minimize them, because they bring a lot of positives as well. So this report as amendment, I think, gets us closer to getting there. I'm proud to support it. And again, I don't want Councillor Rietma to flinch every time he sees a Facebook notification. That's really my main motivator. So,
thanks, Councillor Morales. Any other comments, members of General Committee?
Thank you for carrying, Councillor Morales.
Yeah, and I would certainly echo those comments, and just wanted to offer a couple other things. But one question, Ms. Banting, that was referenced earlier in some of the questions from members of General Committee. You know, we have a fire prevention branch within fire. We have crime prevention programs within policing and paramedicine and community programs within the paramedic service at the county. We don't have a bylaw offense prevention branch, and the nature of the work is different. It's a lot harder to prevent a bylaw infraction in the sense of knowing really sort of what the root causes of that were. But I guess I would echo this report was very eye-opening, and thank you again for the presentation, the briefing, which really helped me understand it in more detail. It did sort of beg the question to me, have we looked at which of our calls we think we might be able to reduce, either through greater education efforts or some form of alternative service delivery, whether that's an online response or not. And I guess that question is less relevant for parking. I mean, parking's parking. I think we've got the strategy. We're going to use new technologies. That's great. It's those other 20,000 calls, and I'm guessing there are MLEO officers out there who just bang their head against the wall that they're having to respond to some of these calls. And I'm wondering if there has been more thought put into looking at those preventable calls, I guess, and furthering our education efforts or related efforts to prevent them.
Thank you, Your Worship. There has been a few things tried. Some have worked greatly over the years. I think one of the issues that we continually find is whether it's, if I use overnight parking as an example, and I understand that's parking and you're talking about the other matters, but overnight parking is seasonal.
Yeah,
and we all know we get snow. And we all know that we advertise it fully through social media. We do it through all the city sites. There's signs as you enter the city that reminds persons to not do that. And that's one of those examples of some things that we attempt to prevent and greatly attempt to prevent. Unfortunately, the matters are still there. There is always an ability for us to increase those as it relates to some of the other ones. Animal control, as an example, is a high call volume in our office. Everyone knows since the 1800s that you shouldn't have your dog run at large, but those things happen. Dog bites do happen, but we are always happy to try and come up with different ways to let the public know what the standards are, whether that be we try and use social media quite a bit to try and get those standards out, but we're always open to coming up with other ways to try and get that information out.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm trying to imagine police, fire, ambulance not increasing their complement in 17 years despite 25,000 additional calls for service. I mean, obviously standards would have to change in terms of responsiveness. And I think it's admirable that you continue to provide the level of service you do, given that that constraint. So I'm sure council will be giving this a very serious consideration. And I think the middle step that you've proposed by way of moving partly, at least keeping up with the demand for service according to current response levels. And I think if council is serious about responding to some of the concerns from our community, then we will have to consider enhancing that further. And that is a budget hit, but one that we may want to consider in response to the concerns from our community. So I really appreciate the good work here as well. And I'll certainly support the I would call it a fairly minimal ask associated with the next 2 years just to maintain service levels, especially given no complement increase for 17 years. So thank you for educating us and also for working so many years with less and still trying to meet the needs of a growing community. So I'll call the question on the motion as amended. It's on the floor. Those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? None. That carries.
Separate report.
Separate report's been requested, Madam Clerk. Next item that was held, there were two. The first item for discussion that was on tonight with regards to Bill 229 and the Conservation Authorities Act was put on by Councillor Ripa and held by Councillor Harvey. Go ahead, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put it on the floor as printed. And obviously, everybody around the table knows that I'm the representative on the MVCA. So obviously, I have an interest in conservation, or else I wouldn't have asked to go on that board at the beginning of this term. So I'd like to start by just saying that, obviously, they do great work, and they're going to continue to do great work. But recently, it's been a very pretentious issue over the past few years. And as a board member of the NVCA, I've not seen CAs changing the way that they do business and focusing primarily on their core mandates, as was discussed at the beginning of this government's term. So this is nothing new that has approached any of the CAs across the province. In January at the Conservation Roundtable here in Barrie, with the minister, CAs were directly asked what their core mandates were. And at that point in time, even Conservation Ontario wasn't able to give a definitive answer to that question. And I look at that as a problem. CAs argue that Bill 229 will create more costs and delays, which is untrue. Some of these changes will actually streamline processes, which in turn should actually save time and money through the processes. It's also argued that this will create delays and appeals through LPAT, but the current process already has an appeal process involved with it that's used very little, and that's through the Mining and Lands Tribunal. Municipalities like Aurelia, for instance, never opted in to being a member of a CA, and they appear to be doing just fine from a watershed perspective. There's been no global audits until recently, when they did a review of one particular CA in 2018. And that's when some of these significant issues apparently were identified, which then spurred on some of these proposed changes that have been coming forward. Another thing, for example, too, conservation investigators actually have more powers than the police and bylaw officers. They can go onto people's properties, go into anywhere on their property without a warrant. And that's another piece of the legislation that they're looking at changing to put everybody on a level playing field. And it also potentially infringes on people's charter, and there have been some rulings even as high as the Supreme Court when it comes to things of that nature. At our own MVCA just this past week, almost a third of us on the board voted against the motion, not in its totality, but there's certain pieces of the motion that we just cannot agree with. And even more recently, Clearview and Simcoe County have rejected similar motions. I'm in favor of conservation. However, it's apparent that some changes need to occur to be able to provide a good balance between conservation, municipalities, and landowners. And as a result, in its current form, I just cannot support such a drastic measure to be asking the government to just outright scrap Schedule 6 out of Bill 229.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harvey. Others who wish to speak to this, Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Myself and Councillor Elwin sit on the LSRCA board, and I must say that I think both of us have experienced that is a very well-run organization, and I think it deserves a whole lot more than what the Schedule 6 is providing. I did see Councillor Harvey's email about this subject. I thought it was very interesting. It's one of the best pieces of spin doctoring that I've seen in a long time. It's been a while since we've seen such a display of alternative facts. And, you know, we all love...
Point of order, Your Worship. I'm not quite sure where Councillor Riepma is going with this, but I really don't appreciate those comments, Your Worship.
Yeah, I was actually just going to remind Councillor Riepma, if you want to ask about the source of the information, that's one thing, but I don't think you can call it false, Councillor Riepma. That's over the line.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize, Councillor Harvey. Let me say that we have 36 conservation authorities in the province. And there's no doubt that there's a couple of them, 3 or 4, that may be quite dysfunctional. And I think everybody agrees that something needs to be done about them. And I think, generally speaking, there is opportunity for improving how conservation authorities function. And in the past year or more, there have been lots of consultations between conservation authorities and the province about that. I understand that the conservation authorities generally were very surprised when they suddenly saw that Schedule 6 came out, and it doesn't reflect any of the discussions that were happening between the conservation authorities and the province up to that point. It seems to me that this proposal is a bit like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. And in this case, the fly is sitting on a window. Now, I don't think it's appropriate for us to debate the minutiae of the legislation, but I think it's enough to say that it proposes that you can go directly to the minister to get your environmental permit. And in my view, that's very similar to the process that we're experiencing now with ministerial zoning orders in the planning world. All of a sudden, we're not dealing with science anymore. It's just what will the minister approve? I don't think this process or what they're suggesting is going to save the taxpayer any money, and it certainly isn't protecting the environment. The process that's being put in place, if you look at the steps involved, is much more cumbersome and much more time-consuming than what it is now. Now, I think that there is a lot of opportunity to take the existing process that we have and to streamline it. I think that there's no doubt a certain amount of duplication between municipalities and the Conservation Authority. I think we should be able to sort that out. But I think that it's it's too much that what the government is suggesting. It's another sort of ham-fisted way that the government has been doing things. And, you know, in other situations, they have backed down and eventually common sense has prevailed. So I'm hoping that everyone will support this motion so that we can have common sense prevailing and that progress will happen in this circumstance. There are a lot of municipalities and AMO, for example, have all supported this approach. And I think we should be looking for a win-win here to protect our environment as well as our processes. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ritma. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Your Worship. And forgive me if I don't appear to be looking at all of you. I'm referencing a resource that I came across and wanted to make a point of that to kind of share why I am also supporting the motion. And, you know, a couple of pieces have moved around attention to this that I think also signal a good positive tone that continued engagement and discussion is warranted and is being requested. And I think the last week we saw the policy, a motion on the policy through the big city mayors asking, I believe, for the removal of Schedule 6. I'm also seeing that the Association of Municipalities of Ontario President Graydon Smith recently wrote to the Premier last week and today made a submission to the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs asking that Schedule 6 of Bill 229, that budget bill, be withdrawn to address some matters. And in reading some of those letters submitted, a couple of areas in particular did help to identify some concerns that support why I'm supporting this motion. And in particular, you know, the concern about a conflict in law that Municipal Conservation Authority board members may experience from proposed governance changes. There were others listed, but overall, I appreciated the tone of the letters in really asking for two things that I think are prudent. And in referencing that letter, I think it couches it as asking that the preferred option would be to withdraw Schedule 6 from Bill 229 and work on the matter separately. And if the government chooses not to withdraw the schedule or doesn't see that it is possible, then perhaps the proclamation of the schedule is delayed until the matters can be clarified and any operational problems can be resolved. So I'm hoping at minimum that happens because I do believe there are some areas of concern and that in general, that appreciated that it would be quite critical to make sure that changes to the Conservation Authorities Act are a positive step forward without unintended consequences. And so I'll guide you to kind of those two pieces that I thought had a lot of context behind them around several areas of concern. And I won't go into detail, but I thought they stood to really call out a delay, if not a removal of Schedule 6.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Others who wish to comment on the motion on the floor? Councillor McCann. Oh, sorry, Councillor Owen, I did see you first, and I'm sorry, I didn't keep the list. Councillor Owen and then Councillor McCann.
That's all right, Mayor Lehman, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to provide comments on this because I think it's a very critical issue for all of our communities, especially as we're living through a climate emergency. I think the concerns that Councillor Harvey raised and as well that the Government of Ontario has raised are valid in a lot of ways. There's always room for improvement in terms of efficiency, speeding up approval processes to ensure that it's fair and doesn't unnecessarily delay development applications. I think that's a fair criticism. And conservation authorities are absolutely willing to work on those things with the government. But unfortunately, what's being proposed here doesn't actually achieve the stated goal of the government. When the government first expressed the desire to streamline the development approvals process through conservation authorities, Conservation Ontario, which represents all of the conservation authorities in the province, actually decided to voluntarily reduce timelines for the issuance of permits based on the previous requirements by 30 days. So voluntarily, they said, hey, look, we can improve our process and streamline it. We're going to reduce that by 30 days. The proposal in Bill 229 in Schedule 6, the number of layers they've added in terms of the appeals process could actually add as many as 200 days to the process. So that's more red tape, that's more delays, and that's more cost around the permitting process. I was at the consultation with the government on behalf of the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority with a couple others, the staff and board members as well. And this was not a change that any of the conservation authorities were asking for. And in fact, the government hasn't even published a summary of those consultations, which I find troubling because I think we need to be transparent about where we all stand on these things. And conservation authorities are not supportive of these changes. And I think that needs to be put on the record, that we made that clear in the consultation, and that the government unfortunately did not take that into consideration with these changes. Some of the other changes that are taking place, one is changes to the Conservation Authorities Act and the Planning Act to eliminate the ability of conservation authorities to take a watershed and science-based approach to planning to protect our environment. It actually removes conservation authorities as a public body that gets a distribution when a new application comes in from a new development. So we aren't a commenting body on these development applications anymore as proposed in the bill. And that's incredibly troubling to me because what the Conservation Authority provides as a service for us as a municipality is the science-based approach and the watershed whole approach to look at the development application, look at the particulars of that development site, and provide advice on the risks in terms of flooding, the risks in terms of maintaining wetlands, and all those great things that the Conservation Authority recommends. So we are able to do that, recommend that, and protect the municipality from potential litigation down the road or from disastrous flooding down the road. So right now we actually see a huge lawsuit in Oakville. It's $1 billion lawsuit, and it names the city, the municipality, and it has to do with flooding and flooding in the town. And so a number of residents are suing the city for the flooding of their homes. And with these changes, we will likely see more of that type of litigation because there's nothing to protect us as municipalities when we make a decision on a development application and don't have the input of the scientists from conservation authorities. We could end up making a decision that puts people and property at risk, and we bear that responsibility rather than the conservation authority providing that advice and bearing that liability. I think that's a really critical piece to note because that's the value that conservation authorities bring to our municipality. It's actually a great investment because they provide that expertise at a watershed level, not just looking in Barrie, but at the Lake Simcoe watershed as a whole, and can protect us from that type of liability. So while I appreciate Councillor Harvey bringing forward those concerns, I really do think it's important that to protect our residents and to protect people and property and the environment, we listen to the science, listen to virtually every environmental group in the province who has called for Schedule 6 to be revoked, and every conservation authority as well who has called for Schedule 6 to be revoked. We should stand with them in order to protect our bottom line and to protect people, property, and the environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. That was a lot of information to process, and I I don't know if staff has the ability to give us a little more light on the comments that Councilor Brittman had, the comments that Councilor Congo had and Councilor Awen had, or if maybe with your direction, Mayor Lehman, if because it's 9:30 at night, maybe if I talk to city staff afterwards. So maybe if there is comments about city staff, I'd love to hear it. And I'd also love to hear Councilor Harvey's comments as well. There was just a lot of meat and all that, and I'd like to get this right. So.
Okay, so are you looking for a comment from our planning staff, Councillor McCann, on the changes? I'm sure Ms. Miller would be happy to offer her opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, for sure.
Please.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor McCann. Certainly it's a complex piece of legislation that is being proposed, and we're still working our way through it, as most municipalities and the Conservation Authority are doing. I think that there is some value in continuing to refine our working relationships with the conservation authorities that we have in our jurisdiction. They do provide some very important work, as you've already noted, with respect to natural hazards and EP lands. I mean, we already made reference to that in the Planning Committee discussion this evening. But at this point in time, we're not in a position to make sort of a specific recommendation or a comment, but we are continuing to work our way through the proposed bill.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ms. Miller, and through you, Mayor Lehman. If I could maybe get Councillor Harvey's opinion tonight, and I don't want to put him on the spot. Like I say, this was a lot of meat, a lot of processing. At least for me, it was, and I just don't feel I've got an efficient amount of evidence to make a secure vote. So could I maybe, Councillor Harvey, get your opinions on what was said after your comments? Or would you prefer to maybe wait for next week?
No, I've been making some notes about some of the comments that have been made, and I can make a global response to them if you'd like.
Yeah, I would, please. Thank you.
Okay. And I know there was some reference made about the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority being well run, and by no means is anything that I'm saying inferring that the NVCA is poorly run, because I'll be quite honest with you. I'm still a supporter of conservation. I'm 100% supporter of what the NVCA does and the way that they operate. There's no question about that. This is solely to do with the legislative changes that we're discussing. That's all this is about. Like, I mean, are there certain things that I think we could probably do better? Definitely. I know the 2 years that I've been there, every year budget time is always an interesting discussion around, especially on the NVCA. We've got so many small municipalities that are around the table, and that always becomes a hot button topic. And like for us, particularly in Barrie, we're the highest paying partner in the NVCA to the tune of almost $400,000 a year. But our actual geographical area that it covers is actually very small in comparison to all of our partners that are part of the NVCA. It covers a lot of Ward 7, probably about a half or a little bit less of Ward 6. There's like 4 or 5 streets in Ward 5, and I think 3 or 4 that might actually be up into Ward 4, I believe, by the looks of the map. It's just that like each year, like, I mean, if you sit back and look at, are you getting value for the work? Some people might question, especially when you look at the lack of volume of applications that they're dealing with, let's say within our own municipality currently. Once the Salem lands finally get moving, whenever that's going to take place, then obviously that'll be different. But like, I mean, that's obviously been one of our recent concerns. And I know there were some comments made about the government and their misuse of MZOs. Have we seen a lot of MZOs since this government took over? Yes. However, even with our most recent discussions in regards to the property up on Penetanguishene Road, we were told in no uncertain terms that the only way the minister would step in and actually issue the MZO that they were requesting was if all of the councils involved had their blessing, and that didn't happen. and we haven't seen an MZO. So I don't believe that that's a concern in this particular situation, that all of a sudden you're going to see the minister overstepping what people would look as their bounds and all of a sudden issuing all these permits and overstepping conservation concepts, especially too when you look at there was reference made to it totally shutting out conservation and their science-based formulas when it comes to whether or not it's good or bad planning from a watershed perspective. That's not the case either. It's very clear in the documentation when I made some inquiries to the government so I could fully understand what was going on, because again, I was only hearing one side of it. I wanted to hear the other side so that way I could make up my own opinion as to what's truly going on here. And in no certain terms, I was told that's not the case. They will be still consulted on these files from a science-based perspective. Where this has become an issue in the past, I've been told, is when you get the CA's science-based approach then conflicting with the applicant's science-based approach. And that's where things have really gotten hung up. I'm no science expert, so I'm not even going to try and decipher that piece of it, but that's been one ongoing issue. And I'll be quite honest with you, I don't think there's a CA around that could say that everything they've done has been perfect. CAs get sued regularly from landowners after they end up with floods when allegedly they had already gone through whatever process they required before things were being built, whether it's even something as simple as a small home on a property out in a rural area, or it could even be within the city limits of the city of Barrie potentially. Anything that's within the watershed would have gone through the conservation authorities screening process through their planning department. So I just don't see where these arguments, like, I mean, do they need to probably sit down and talk more? Definitely. It's just that the motions that are being presented by Conservation Ontario are taking it to a whole other level of let's just scrap it. And I think it speaks volumes when we've got someone like the body of the Simcoe County where the county has refused to endorse this motion. I think that really speaks volumes when it comes to a global perspective for this part of the province.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Appreciate that information. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where I stand in this one, so I'm not sure if any other councillors are going to tap in, but I'd like to hear what they have to say. Thank you, Mayor Lehman.
Thanks, Councillor McCann. Next, Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To Councillor Riepma and Councillor Aylwin, did you have an opportunity to have a discussion about this with MPPs Downey and Khanjin?
Councillor Riepma.
I did not actually have that discussion. However, the general manager of the Conservation Authority has had those discussions and has had them with the government generally for quite a while already. So I'm working with that.
Councillor Owen.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman, and thank you for the question, Councillor Harris. As I said, I did participate in the consultations with the provincial government here in Barrie, and Andrea Khanjin, as the parliamentary secretary for the environment, parliamentary assistant, pardon me, for the environment, was leading a large part of those consultations. So yes, I did participate in that forum. You know, it's our Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority board as a whole that has sent, we unanimously supported a letter to the province that was calling for these changes to stop. And I want to make it clear, we aren't just outright asking, that's not what's in the motion tonight, is we aren't outright asking they just scrap the changes and that's it. We're actually asking that the government sit down with conservation authorities and work through the changes in Schedule 6 to ensure that we can get the balance right.
Okay, thank you. Through you, may I go, Mayor Lehman? Yes. Okay. Through you, Mayor Lehman. So I appreciate that. I think that it's really important to, I have spoken to MPPs Khanjin and Downey, and the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority report really goes into talking about the transparency needed that isn't necessarily present right now. So, for example, some of the CAs were making money off of weddings and not necessarily focusing on things like flood prevention. So there is a lot more detail to why the entire bill with this schedule is here. So I have you, either of you, read that report, Councillor Riepma or Councillor Aylwin?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, in answer to Councillor Harris's question, I've not read the whole report, but it is true that the Niagara Conservation Authority, there were considerable issues there. The interesting thing was there that one of the comments that the independent review panel made very clearly was that the members of that conservation authority should have been, because they're on that board, they should have been dealing with the best interests of the conservation authority in mind. And the board members were criticized because they were acting as quotation marks, municipal representatives without the best interests of the board members or the Conservation Authority board in mind. And that's what the panel discussed and said shouldn't happen anymore. And then the interesting thing is that the Schedule 6 says exactly the opposite of what the board recommended. And they're saying that the principal requirement would be that any municipal representative, first of all, be there as a municipal to speak the concerns of the municipality, as opposed to having the concerns of the Conservation Authority at heart. So I agree with you that conservation authorities really shouldn't be in the wedding business, for sure. And I think that there are absolutely that there should be more transparency. I know that in some conservation authorities, that's a real big issue. And I know that the LSRCA, where we sit, is a very transparent organization and is even trying to become even more transparent. So I think it's very dependent on what conservation authority you're considering, and I think that there is a need to generally move conservation authorities forward. Some are a lot better positioned than others are at the moment. And I think that that's what this motion is hoping to move forward, is that there be more discussion, that there be a win-win, that the parties work together, and that we come out at the other end as having a very good and improved system that is also consistent across the province. And that's where we need to go, I think, as opposed to taking a shotgun at it and blasting it. I think we're much better off to work together to get a good resolution. I'm sorry, that might have been a long-winded answer to a short question. But
Thank you. I guess I'll let Councillor Aylwin answer as well.
Yeah, Councillor Owen, anything to add? Although we do want to move that discussion along now.
No, absolutely.
It's important.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
no, absolutely. No, go ahead, Councillor Owen, just
it
short
is
answer if you could.
absolutely, absolutely important. Transparency is paramount. I have not read that specific report. However, I think the thing we need to remember with Schedule 6 is that what they're proposing is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If we have concerns around transparency, we can fix that. And that's what this motion is asking to do. But the changes in Schedule 6 don't actually address that.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman. Also, question, and I appreciate what you're saying, and obviously it's not about not moving forward. I think that it's important, though, for the amount of information that maybe not everyone in the public or on council is aware of that they do know. So, for example, that the Ontario Farmers Network supports the Schedule 6, and they say that it's actually long overdue. So that's a pretty important fact for me. And another thing as well is that in Ramera, the mayor has said that a CA prevented them from building a drain to prevent flooding. So they had to build it anyways. And again, this is from actual conversations with MPP Downey and MPP Khanjin, because I wanted to learn more about what this was entailing as well. So it is all about transparency, and the problem is there has been such a lack of it. So the schedule, it's when we throw in the words conservation authority, I think there's so much more research, and you have to go deeper into thinking if we change the rules around conservations and around CAs, that's going to mean that it's negatively affecting or having a negative ripple effect on our environment, etc. But if we look at the actual data and the actual facts, and there is science in that report, it shows that there are some big changes that need to be made, and that's why that schedule is there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. I do have a list. Councillor Thompson, you're next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to the mover of the motion. I'm just looking for a little clarity. What is your intentions, Councillor Reba, with the motion?
Yeah, the intention is that we would send whatever we adopt to the Minister of Environment and to our MPs. That's item 6 in the motion, and it's just to sort of say, look, we think that all of these things are important, and I think that we need to move forward on that. And just in terms of what Councillor Natalie Harris just said, I agree. You know, I don't blame the agricultural people from supporting Schedule 6, because in a lot of municipalities, they've been frozen out by the Conservation Authority. That's not the case in Simcoe or in the Lake Simcoe Conservation Area, because you know, we're very cognizant there of agriculture, but it's not true in other municipalities or in other conservation authorities. So we really need to, you know, move the conservation authorities forward rather than throwing the baby out with bathwater, as Councillor Aylwin said.
Just clarity.
Point of order. I'll be quite honest with you. I'm getting a little disturbed how the terminology of throwing a baby out without the bathwater, like, I don't know who came up with that, but that's quite a disturbing analogy of any discussion at this table, let alone throwing it into this conversation. I just can't fathom that somebody's come up with that analogy and think that it's appropriate.
So that's an old colloquial expression. I guess you know, I've heard it so often. I don't really consider. I hadn't really considered it that way, Councillor Harvey. I'm not sure it's strictly speaking out of order, that particular piece. So I rolled against Councillor Riepma before, but I don't think I can tell him that expression, which is pretty commonly used, is out of line. I know it's not the pleasantest one, but perhaps I can ask Councillor Riepma, though, if you could keep your answers a little shorter. We're over an hour on this item. I do still have a long speakers list. And if you could just wrap up your answer to Councillor Thompson's question, and then Councillor Thompson, you'll have the floor again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, if that expression offended Councillor Harvey, I'll withdraw it unreservedly. And I guess just my last thought is, one of the difficulties I think is just the word authority. It just gives, I think, the wrong impression of everything. And maybe.
Councillor Raymond, not to be rude, your intentions is just writing a letter. Is that correct? And showing your support. I just wanted an answer to. So basically, the large, like Mayor Lehman and his colleagues wrote a letter asking for it. AMO just published one today. So we're basically just writing another letter. Is that what I'm showing our support in? Yep. I would love to see the stats on our writing the letters. I would hate for there to be a scoreboard above the mayor's head in our council chambers. But I'll leave it at that. But I was just looking for the clarity. If you're looking for support on what all other levels and people have done, I was just looking for a little bit of clarity. Thank you.
Thanks for that perspective, Councillor Thompson. Yes, this motion is one that's been in front of several hundred municipal councils in Ontario, and it calls on the government to slow down. But certainly, there's far more detail to it than that. And I'll hold any other of my own comments for now. Councillor Morales, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll keep my 2 comments quick. Councillor Harvey, I actually agree with your comment. I do obviously, baby out with the bathwater is an old saying, so I don't think there was any malice from either of the councillors using it. But I think it speaks to this general idea that, and I'm speaking generally, that, for example, if you don't agree with my point, throwing a baby out with the bathwater, it's like you don't like babies, right? The omnibus language of accountability, transparency. You don't agree with my point, man, you must hate accountability and transparency. So I kind of get what you're getting at. That's more of a systemic discussion, I guess, for us council. Again, at that strategic meeting later this week, though. But my points to the discussion, been pretty quiet on this. Councillor Natalie Harris, just to clarify on the wedding thing, I'm actually somewhat supportive of weddings at conservation authorities. I'll tell you why. So in the time that I was on the conservation authority, that's a huge revenue source for them. Like huge. So we're already paying for their big fancy buildings that, you got politicians that say they don't need that big fancy building. You have politicians that say, no, they need the resources to do their job, to do enforcement, to protect the environment. What usually happens is they end up doing both. They do the important enforcement, and they do have the, maybe not big fancy building, but building that can usually host weddings. So I actually see it as a creative revenue source. Unfortunately, the weddings is used as the soundbite to make it sound negative. So I just wanted to provide clarity. I'm not saying I have the numbers right in front of me. I don't know. Now, if they're spending more on marketing and operating the weddings than they're bringing in, yeah, like literally cut the services tomorrow. But that actually might be a healthy revenue generation to offset costs. And as we know, we've heard presentations from various conservation authorities coming to us for capital dollars for various expansion projects. I think creative ways to bring more revenues might be a positive thing. The only other comment I'll provide to people is, again, on my time in the Conservation Authority last term, they are like a quasi council. They're kind of like a county of Simcoe kind of regional council. I'm not questioning people's motives. I'm sure they're there for the right reasons. They want to do what's best. But if you think it's hard getting meetings along at 9:45 p.m. in the city of Barrie, imagine doing it with representatives from urban centers, rural centers, and people whose family have plotted the same have farmed the same piece of land for 200 years. It is very conflicting, lots of stress, things get personal, so things can be slow and efficient. So I guess I do see some of the efficiencies that they're trying to do with this latest bill. But what I'm saying is, again, if anybody's ever bored, jump on a call to any I'm not picking on our conservation authority. I'm just saying, kind of look around and see and observe kind of that culture, because that's very unique in terms of governance. So,
can I respond to that, Mayor Lehman?
Sure, Councillor Harris. I actually don't have anybody else on the speakers list, so go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Through you, oh wow, there's a lot of speakers. Sorry. No, Councillor Morales, I appreciate that. And I'm not against weddings in any way. And definitely it's a revenue it's massive and a positive revenue stream. What I'm referring to more so is that making money off of weddings versus focusing on things like flood prevention. That's kind of where there's a bit of an imbalance in the reports. And then I also just wanted to add that I'm losing. I have like too many things to mention as well. It'll come back to me. There's more people that want to talk. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Thank you.
Okay, and as the speakers list does continue, I do want to give everybody a chance to speak to this, but I do also eventually want to bring this to a vote. So I have Councillor Jim Harris, then Deputy Mayor Ward, then Councillor Aylwin again. So Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And to Councillor Thompson's question about the scorecard of letters to provincial and federal government, I can tell you we wrote 12 in 2019. This will be our 4th one this year. On this item, I would say this would be our 3rd letter on this item if you included our participation in the AMO and the Large Urban Mayors Caucus. So from my perspective, one more letter that has Barrie on the docket is of not concern to me, given we've already supported 2. So I hope we'll be able to get to a vote and move this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor Ward.
I'll try to be brief. And I think we've got distracted by a lot of other issues. And I think the main one is we should be doing everything possible to protect the environment. It's incredibly important. I mean, it's important anytime, not just because of climate change. It's important anytime to protect the environment. And I think for me, and I spent 12 years on the conservation authorities, I've been on both conservation authorities. There are some individuals and some developers who are constantly pressuring the conservation authorities to build on floodplains, to build on wetlands. And the conservation authorities, to their credit, in my experience, always say no. They try to work with the property owner, but you've got a firm rule. And I mean, no matter what else about this legislation, it allows the minister to overrule, to issue building permits without the conservation authority's approval. It allows conservation authority decisions to be appealed to the minister, and the minister can overturn them. Anybody who thinks that, you know, this legislation is being brought in to make it more difficult for developers to build on wetlands or build on floodplains. I mean, the only reason it's being brought in, let's be realistic, is to make it easier for that to happen. So I think for that reason alone, I'll support the motion that's on the floor. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Back to you, Councillor Owen.
Just one thing. Schedule 6 is throwing out the champagne with the cork. How's that?
All right.
I guess we always need to be a smart aleck at council, unfortunately, do we? Your worship, I'm getting tired of this.
All right, I would like to bring this to a vote before we end up worrying about the way we're talking to each other more than the issue on the floor, which does seem to happen more these days. Is there anyone else who wishes to comment? Okay, I haven't yet, so I'll offer a few things up. So there was reference to the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus. We had a healthy discussion around this, actually. It was fascinating. Everyone from Thunder Bay to Ottawa to Mayor Tory in Toronto. The caucus did actually pass a stronger motion than this opposing Schedule 6, just asking the government to slow down because this is being rushed through committee this week. And to consult more on the issue. It was very interesting in that discussion because there were mayors all along the spectrum, from agreeing with the government that CAs needed to be strongly curtailed to some who believe that they actually need their powers expanded. But what was really interesting was every one of the 29 of us felt that reform is needed. That there has been mission creep in certain areas for conservation authorities, that the development process needs to be improved. And even those who are the staunchest defenders, I can tell you, believe there should be change. So one of the reasons I'm going to support this motion that's on the floor, and then the wording is important, is it's not stop all changes. It's not that there shouldn't be reform. It's that there needs to be, government needs to slow down and consult and provide a longer transition period. That's paragraph 3. I would tell you that I believe there's changes that are major changes that are actually needed to especially the process. But you know, the information that Councillor Harvey sent around indicates that, and it seems to represent the government's view. I don't know if that's fair, Councillor Harvey, but what it indicates is that this is similar to powers that exist for the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing with respect to municipal approval authority under the Planning Act. It's anticipated that this power would be used in limited circumstances and in accordance with further direction or regulation on how and when this power would be used. Which means it is the MZO power only extended to the Conservation Act. And so the concern that I would have there is whether or not it will be used in limited circumstances. And I think, Councillor Harvey, you make a good point that if we had some assurances from the minister that, for example, local councils would be consulted before that authority was exercised, I would feel much more confident about the changes that the government wanted to make. So I guess at the root of it, though, when I sort of sit back and look at it, we've had tremendous progress made in cleaning up Lake Simcoe. We've had huge phosphorus reductions. We've seen the return of fish species that we thought were gone, a dramatic improvement in the quality of the environment, and that is really due to the efforts of the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. Mike Walters was here a few months ago. He made that presentation to all of us. I think we were lavishing him with praise for the work of the LSRCA in protecting Lake Simcoe. And I want them to be able to continue that work. And genuinely, my concern is that the proposed Schedule 6 in the bill would curtail conservation authorities' mandates so broadly that I don't believe they would be able to do what they have done over the past several decades to protect the lake. So in closing, I would say I would never defend the worst excesses of scope creep that have occurred at conservation authorities. I would certainly agree that there is an improvement needed in the transparency of some of their decision making. However, this bill goes way, way beyond that. And that's why we've seen so many cities, so many municipalities, including our own AMO, pass similar bills to this. Support this is not because I believe things should stay the same. There need to be changes to conservation authorities. But what is being proposed is a sledgehammer, I think, to their mandate. And I think their mandate has proven to be very important in Barrie and in the Lake Simcoe area in particular. So lots of discussion, lots of back and forth. After about an hour on whether we should write this letter, I would like to call the question. So I will ask for those in favor of the motion that is on the floor. The motion is on the floor as printed by Councillor Riepma. And are we all clear on what we're voting on? It's the motion that was printed. Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion, please indicate. And those opposed to the motion, please indicate. Okay, it carries. Thank you for the discussion, members of General Committee. The remaining item that was held is with regards to the additional sound barriers along Highway 400. It was put on by Deputy Mayor Ward, Councillor Owen, Councillor Kungl, and held by Councillor Jim Harris. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I appreciate this effort on behalf of the residents of, I guess it's Ward 2, 3, and 4. And what's come to attention for me and respectfully is not so much what's being presented, but it's in relation to what's presented. It's the sound barriers. And as one might expect, given that Ward 8 has a significant exposure to Highway 400, some very interested, engaged, and we know how engaged the residents of Ward 8 are. We had a town hall last week, Mayor Lehman, where we smashed the record for virtual town halls with one ward far exceeding the other multiple ward town halls. So on behalf of residents of Ward 8, I just wanted to make a note of this respectfully, and thank you for allowing me, around this particular opportunity that Deputy Mayor Ward has presented with Councillor Kungl and Councillor Aylwin it doesn't represent a reach back on previous opportunities to investigate sound barriers in the Essa Road area. And maybe that's a question forward through you to Ms. Banfield.
Sure, Ms. Banfield. And maybe we'll go to Ms. Miller if you're able to provide an answer on that.
Thank you.
Oh, there's Ms. Banfield. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. No, so certainly noise barriers can provide localized improvements, but ultimately it's to just lessen the path of the noise. So the most immediate benefits are if you're right there or in the shadow. So as soon as you move away, really the benefit of the noise barrier decreases the benefit of it.
Thank you, Ms. Banfield. And just to make a follow-up, I know that for the benefit of folks who who might be thinking this is an opportunity to extend barriers, and we see a lot of them on the 400 if you're getting closer to Toronto. And if you could just give a little bit of highlight on why they're more prevalent in those areas that we see on the 400 south of us.
Absolutely. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Jim Harris. That tends to be a relationship between how much residential land is immediately abutting the highway corridor, and those residential uses tend to be considered more noise sensitive. We don't have in the city of Barrie that many residential areas right near the highway corridor. Many times, we see commercial or industrial or institutional uses that are a little bit less sensitive. So the MTO has in 2017 looked at all of the sensitive noise locations across the highway corridor in the city and are recommending adding about 7 locations along the corridor in proximity to those areas. Dunlop Street, Bayfield Street, some of the streets north of Duckworth, where there are residential uses abutting the highway.
Great, thank you. And just maybe just more of a comment, I don't know if it's a question, but in relation to the Essa Road interchange study, what I've understood from that review was that sound barriers indicated as not making an impact for the residents. I have obviously residents from Deborah and Marshall up through the area who have had questions, and they talk about the impact of the highway noise and the busyness of our highway on them. But correct again that study mentioned that those areas would not be indicated as receiving benefit from a sound barrier.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Harris. Any others who wish to comment on this motion? Yeah, Deputy Mayor Ward and then Councillor Kungle.
Actually, I'll let Councillor Kungle go ahead. I think she's got an amendment.
Okay, Councillor Kungle.
Great, through your worship. I'm looking to table an amendment, and the context is that, and I want to say thank you to Ms. Miller and staff from the engineering department. We're quick on being able to get some information which changes the context specific to language in the motion under 3B. But furthermore, the identified sound barrier by Little Lake be considered for a berm structure. It's come to my attention that through engineering, a berm structure is actually not physically possible in that area. So I am looking to amend to strike 3B unless that has any impact, and I'll look to staff to identify this, on any other ward area that a sound barrier is planned where a berm might also be possible, but that is not my understanding. So before I strike all of it, I'll look to see if Ms. Miller, there's any comment through you or members of staff from engineering, if we should leave in other areas that still can be considered for a berm structure.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Kungle. At this time, we're not concerned about the striking of the verbiage that you have suggested. But if you do want to leave it more open, we can certainly work with that, but not necessary at this time.
Then okay. I'll table an amendment at least to make sure that those, especially in Ward 3, know that those that have been asking for a berm is not possible based on specific review of that physical space. To modify 3B, or sorry, B specifically to be that other areas be considered for appropriateness of a berm versus noise wall. And I'll leave it at that level.
Okay, so the amendment is to get rid of the specific reference to Little Lake. That's the amendment on the floor. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Actually, I think I'm probably commenting to the entire motion, so I will hold on again.
Okay, just on the amendment, anyone want to comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll just call the question on that amendment. Those in favor, removing the reference to the Little Lake? Okay, yes, unanimous, passes unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Natalie Harris.
I was just, thank you, Mayor Lehman, just through you to Councillor Kungl. Have you had an opportunity again to talk to MPP Khanjin or Downey about this yet too, being it's provincial?
Councillor Kungl.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I didn't reach out to them because it's actually a process that's open right now, and specifically to where we've already got an identified area for Little Lake. It was really just exploring a different structure if it was possible physically. So that is my interest around something that's already been confirmed that might need to go back, and does build on really great conversation that some of us had at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference with Ms. Mulrooney around transportation. So I've left it at that level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And through you, Mayor Lehman, have you had a chance to speak to the president of Georgian College yet at all? Does she have
Councillor Kungl?
Oh, sorry, to Councillor Kungl. Yeah. Do you know if she has concerns with barriers that would potentially block signage, etc., the college?
So I'm not aware of any concerns. I'm also not doing a formal kind of consultation, but am sharing information that this open process that is being run by, I believe, the project managers is open until December the 19th. So from that regard, all I can say is that from a resident awareness of Ward 3, that there is an awareness that a structure has been planned and committed for that Little Lake area, but it was to explore whether or not we could look at a different green type of infrastructure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you. Just to clarify on that last point, it's actually the berm is on the other side of the 400, not the Georgian College side. So there is no plans for any kind of a barrier on the Georgian College side of the 400. I just want to point out that what we're doing here is, we're responding to the notice of completion and submission of design and construction report. We're in the 30-day commenting period. That's why it's come forward. That only deals with the area north of Dunlop Street. So there's nothing to do with anything with the south wards yet. That may come. And I guess my main point of this motion is, the thing the three of us are putting this on is because in the 2017 environmental assessment, it actually recommended more sound barriers than we're getting now. It actually had them north of Bayfield Street along the residential areas. They've all been dropped for some reason. And I guess my concern is they're actually going backwards. We're getting fewer sound barriers than were originally recommended. There's an additional one, because I know there's a major townhouse development coming forward on Edge Hill, which isn't going to be covered by this. And if it's approved by us, I'd like to see it protected by sound barriers as well. I guess I wanted to temper some expectations. It's absolutely right. Sound barriers are not going to make a big difference. 5 decibels is what they estimate they reduce. It's not a big difference, but I think it's at least some improvement. And I think that, residents' life will be improved. The quality of life of residents will be improved, because at least it'll be, and maybe the problem won't get a lot worse, but it's not going to eliminate the noise. That's clear. And there's many sections of Barrie where they're not justified, either because they're in a ravine or it's an industrial section. Thanks. Oh, I wanted to make one addition, and actually partly Councillor Harris's point, Natalie Harris's point about Doug Downey. I'd like him to be, at the risk of throwing on another letter, it's to say that the resolution be sent to, forwarded to MPP Doug Downey. And the only reason it's only Doug Downey is because none of this is in Andrew Kenjan's ward. So I would like a copy of this to be sent to you. If I can make that amendment.
Okay, the amendment's on the floor to send a copy of the motion to MPP Downey. That's the amendment. On the amendment, Councillor Thompson, was that you asking to speak?
I just want to say thanks, Councillor Ward. You actually made me really laugh out loud there because noticing about the letter writing, I appreciate that.
One more letter. Okay, on the amendment, those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed to Deputy Mayor Ward's amendment? None. That carries. Deputy Mayor Ward, anything else on the motion? Or okay. And my apologies. I think somebody else indicated, but I didn't catch who it was. Was there anyone else on this motion? No? Oh, good. Okay. We're there. I'll just express my appreciation for the councillors who caught this, to be frank, because it was in the Tesser 3 years ago when the highway plans were made public. I can remember it at the public meeting at the Holiday Inn or the open house. People were delighted that the residents of Ottawa Avenue, just north of Bayfield Street, were finally going to get the sound walls they were promised in the 70s. And now they're gone again. And I suspect it was a cost-cutting measure. And even though it's only a 5 decibel difference, it makes a heck of a difference if you back on to Highway 400. So on behalf of our residents, I think this is a good thing to ask for. So I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion as amended, please indicate. Any opposed? None. That carries unanimously. It brings us to inquiries on our agenda. Deputy Mayor Ward, any inquiries of staff?
I wouldn't dare put an inquiry on now.
Members of General Committee, any inquiries of staff? Nope. Announcements. Deputy Mayor Ward, any announcements?
I have none.
Members of General Committee, any announcements? Councillor Kungl and then Councillor Riepma.
Yes, thank you. One announcement, and it just comes on the heel, again, of some outcomes with the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus, and drawing attention that, Barrie, of course, sits there with our Mayor Jeff Lehman representing us. And I wanted to share congratulations that he was appointed chair of OBCM. Bonnie Crombie was named vice chair. And also a big thank you to Mayor Cam Guthrie out of Guelph for his service over the past 2 years. So congratulations, Mayor Lehman, on your next 2-year term, and thank you for representing the city at that level and with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kungl. Appreciate that. Councillor Riepma.
Councillor Kungl stole my thunder completely.
Well, thank you for thinking of it as well. Councillor, thank you. No, I do appreciate that, members of the General Committee, and it's certainly an honor given everybody who's in that caucus, lots of very experienced mayors, that they had that confidence in me to do that. Cam, by the way, we often compare ourselves to Guelph. Our relationship with Guelph, I have to tell you, because I was Cam's vice for the last 2 years, we just talk all the time, and he just did yeoman's work. I mean, during COVID, the attendance at those caucus meetings went from sometimes being close to quorum, which is now 15, it was 14. Now it's up to almost full attendance. Mayor Tory's there all the time. Mayor Watson's there all the time from Ottawa. And, we've made a real difference with the both in advocacy to the province and I think on municipal issues more generally. So I'm honored to try and continue Cam's legacy. Councillor Jim Harris, I have you next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I briefly mentioned the Ward 8 Town Hall that was held last Wednesday, and I just wanted to, COVID's an awful thing, but some of the impacts of COVID aren't awful, like virtual town halls. And it really, we had over 75 people there, which was wonderful. And so a very engaged Ward 8, and that's a 1-ward town hall. And so I want to give some thank yous to the folks who made this happen, and certainly from your office, Lauren Wild and Nina Brancatio did a fabulous job of putting on the night. And Lauren was a great moderator. And thank you as well to yourself. And the speed round at the end was greatly appreciated, as we had lots of questions in the chat. And we decided to do actually Mayor Lehman decided to do a speed round, and we got a lot of questions answered. And to residents who have also didn't get their questions asked that night, Many have had them answered since. So thank you to Ms. Schlichter, Ms. Banfield, Ms. Miller, Mr. Ferrari, those who have provided answers to me post-meeting to get back to residents. So thank you to the always engaged Ward 8 for showing up. And we'll see if any other their ward can break the record that we've just set for virtual town hall attendance. So thank you again to everybody, and thanks for listening to this. I appreciate it. It's been a long night. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harris. No, it was a very, very good town hall, and I really appreciate the turnout from the residents of the ward. Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Very quickly, just want to note again for the public that there's a vacancy on the Active Transportation and Sustainability Advisory Committee, and the application deadline is 4:30 p.m. This Friday, December 4th. And so you can go to the city's website, committee and board vacancies, to find the application process. And then also quickly, Noella is in full swing in downtown Barrie. And I'm sure Mayor Lehman will be noting the free 2-hour parking in his announcements, but that's very exciting. And residents can go to noella.downtownbarrie.ca to learn about all the great things that are happening.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Any other announcements? Members of General Committee? Okay, I promised to say something about the capital budget report. All I'm going to say is this. Staff closed out a huge number of projects here, so this was an unusually large list. The appendices in that staff report are very long, but the net of it all is 15 million under budget, 5 million over budget. I know there's commonly a perception that city projects can run over budget, and there have been examples of those that do, but this details every single project, plus and minus, over the past many years, and the performance of our staff in bringing the majority of projects in under budget rather than over is all detailed in that report. And thank you, because that's a lot of work by a lot of project managers and a lot of different departments that comes into one staff report that went on consent tonight. So I did want to make note of that and mention it. Okay, I'm going to cut a bunch of these announcements, but I got to talk about the snow ones. So first of all, I do want to proclaim December 2020 as Christmas Cheer Month, and they could use your help this year, everybody. Christmas Cheer is accepting virtual donations. They can't take toys in the way that they have other years. We're also proclaiming December 3rd as International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Yes, thanks, Councillor Owen. Downtown parking is now free as of tomorrow in all on-street spaces and in the Chase McEachern parking lot beside Meridian Square for the first 2 hours through the month of December. Visit downtownbarrie.ca to find out more about Downtown Barrie stores, restaurants, and services. After 5 p.m., of course, parking is free on street and everywhere, Monday through Friday and all day on weekends. But note, Spirit Catcher Lot, Marina Lot, Lakeshore Lot are still waterfront parking lots, and we do enforce there if you don't have your pass. Okay, so the snow thing. It is snowing out there now, and boy, is it going to snow more later tonight. And the timing is perfect because in an hour and 41 minutes, our on-street parking restrictions come into effect overnight. You can't park on city streets between midnight and 7 a.m. starting December 1st, and December 1st starts at midnight tonight. So please note tonight, for all those watching, please get your car off the street, because I can tell you we probably are going to have to do some plowing with this major storm that is just starting to hit us now tonight. Downtown, the time is 3 to 6 as a reminder. Also, snow angels. It's appropriate because there's going to be some people who need snow angels tomorrow, and certainly the day after that. Snow angels is that connection for volunteers who are willing to help out a neighbor who can't shovel their snow, particularly out of their driveway or their walkway, the end of their driveway. You can go on the website and volunteer to help a neighbor who can't clear snow. The website allows you to connect to somebody in your area who needs the help. The website is snowangelscanada.ca. I do have a number of other announcements. However, I think I've given them on many times over previous weeks. A reminder, we are in the orange restrict level of the COVID restrictions. We did see higher case numbers in both the city and across the health unit today. And it just reinforces the need for everybody to continue to follow that public health guidance. as we are trying to fight the spread, and that's what will allow us to have businesses remain open and services and so forth remain as they are. Okay, with that, comments on the circulation lists, members of General Committee. November 23rd, any comments on the circulation list from November 23rd? Okay, seeing none. November 30th, any comments on tonight's circulation list? Councillor Ritma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The memo A2, which is the single-use plastics, I just wondering if we could send that off to City Building for further discussion.
Okay, that's a referral motion, which is non-debatable. So I will simply call the question on referring the memo on single-use plastics to City Building Committee. Those in favor of referring the memo, please indicate. Is anyone opposed? None. That carries. Any other items from tonight's circulation list, members of General Committee? Okay. Seeing none, the confidential item was not held, which completes our General Committee meeting agenda. Thank you all. General Committee is adjourned. We will see you. There's City Building Committee tomorrow night and City Council next Monday. Good night, everybody.